Welcome to Creating a Disruption, the podcast that focuses on ways to disrupt the traditional classroom by using engaging teaching and learning strategies. I am Brian Hall, Associate Professor of English and Coordinator of Studio 101 on the Metro campus of Cuyahoga Community College. Studio 101 is the campus's creative learning space. And with me is our co-host, Kara DePaul.
Good morning.
Today's guest is Professor Erin Susick, Assistant Professor of Mathematics at the Eastern Campus. She has been with the college since 2018 and recently received the Excellence in Teaching Award in honor of Ralph M. Bessie, which is presented annually to faculty and adjuncts who show exceptional professional competence and commitment to helping students succeed. So first off, congratulations on receiving that award.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here today.
Oh, and thank you, yes. So I want to start off with that since the Cleveland Guardians made the playoffs, I know that you wrote a grant to take your statistics students to a Cleveland Guardians baseball game this upcoming spring. So I'm just curious about how that came about, why you thought that would be an awesome experience for your students. And I know it hasn't happened yet, but how do you think, or how do you hope, I guess, your students would respond to that?
Well, in my statistics classes in the past, we've done lots of different examples about baseball. We've analyzed runs and on-base percentage. We've looked at pitchers' ERA, and it was kind of a natural progression. Like, how can we do more of this? How can we use this to make students excited about statistics and take a little field trip? I also am collaborating with some of my colleagues and counterparts on this project, so we'll take a couple of different classes to the baseball game. And we hope to actually talk with their data analyst or their sabermetrician, which is the study of baseball statistics, to talk to them about how they use statistics to make decisions about getting players on their team, like who to choose, and different salary and other monetary, ideas that help with the game and to make the team successful, kind of like a Moneyball situation.
Oh, interesting. So that person would be who works for the Guardians to sort of talk through the analytics.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So have you always had an interest in baseball? So why baseball over maybe one of the other sports?
I've sort of always liked sports in general, but there are a lot of ways to apply statistics to baseball. There's a whole field, like I said, dedicated to baseball statistics. And I think for me, just watching a baseball game isn't always the most exciting thing. But when I sort of understood the statistics behind it, like how are you analyzing these players? What does this play mean for the player's stats? It was a lot more interesting for me.
Yeah.
So what type of grant did you get, and how did you get this grant?
It was the LTE grant.
The Learning and Teaching Excellence grant for the
Yes.
foundation. Okay.
Yep.
So all your students are going to go together with you.
Mhm.
You all sit together.
Yes. Yeah. If they're available to go. Yep. And we'll have a couple different classes from different professors across the college that'll be going with me too.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
As a teacher, how important is it for you to find these moments where students can apply what they're learning?
It's really important to help students apply their learning. With the different pathways we have in math, where different majors are going to take a different pathway of math, either the STEM pathway, which is the traditional college algebra, calculus sequence, the stats pathway, where you have maybe your healthcare professionals and your social science majors taking those statistics courses, and some business students as well, and also our quantitative literacy pathway. You can really boil down a lot of your contextualized examples for students in their major, and that's really helpful to get buy-in. For statistics, it's very easy to bring in like the healthcare examples and show nurses how statistics are used in their field. And this is a way with baseball to kind of bring something outside of their major that they might be interested in looking at as it relates to math and how like math can enhance the game and their experience with it.
So do you see, so a lot of students are, when they come to math, maybe they had bad experience, right, in math. Maybe they don't quite understand how to use math or how math will end up being important for what they want to do. So by doing things like this, you do feel like it helps, do you feel like it helps those students who might be a little insecure or a lot insecure in their abilities to have a greater comfort level with it, or maybe moving towards that way?
Yeah, I think it definitely can help students with their comfort level if they're interested in the subject. I think more than that, though, is building relationships with your students and just having them in the classroom or online and having that relationship with you, and then, just kind of approaching them from the perspective of, you might have had bad experiences in the past, but you're here and I believe you can do it and I am here to help you, and build that relationship. I think that that's the biggest thing that helps, at least in my experience, with student success and interest.
When you're, so I'm just fascinated, so sorry,
That's
Karen.
okay, keep
But
going.
so with in online classes, because I think a community is important. So I think similar to math and English, a lot of times people come in it for whatever happened in their past, they go, I just can't write. And it's true. It's that the relationship that you build with them that makes them more comfortable. How do you do that within sort of an online environment, or some of the challenges that present in an online environment, creating that type of community?
It is really tricky in asynchronous classes. I usually have a handful of students that I just can't get to interact with me throughout the semester. But in general, I think, building community starts with building the relationship with me. So I make sure I'm in contact a lot with my students. I do Blackboard announcements. I make, little check-in videos I use Remind to contact students. And then the guided notes that the students will take. They will watch videos that are created by me, and I'll make little jokes here and there in the notes and kind of infuse my personality in it, so they feel like they're getting sort of that in-class experience and they get to know me through those videos. So I think that helps with that relationship and that community aspect. As far as working with other students, I try to use the discussion boards for my asynchronous classes as much as I can to foster that community with other students. It can be hard to get students engaged in the discussion board posts, but I use the New York Times What's Going On in This Graph as a resource for that, where the students are looking at graphs each week, posting about what they notice, what they wonder about the graph, how does it relate to them, and things like that. And to foster that community, I think it's important to make sure you're clear about discussion board posts and what's expected of students, because if you don't post directions or like a sample model post, you can have students just write 1 or 2 words and then they're done. But making sure you have that model of how do you post and then how do you respond to your classmates can help foster that discussion in an asynchronous class.
And those watching the video will see this. Those listening, I did pull up one of those graphs from the New York Times, and this is what's going on in this graph. 2020 census redistricting. So for an assignment like this, what are students then looking at, or what's connected with this?
So I use these graphs in a bunch of different ways in my classes. One way is to talk about current events and to reinforce vocabulary. So if we look at the 2020 redistricting, the students are going to notice that Ohio has a -1 there, which means they lost a House seat. So they can talk about what that might mean for them. They can talk about what the graph looks like. It looks like a map of the United States. And from there, I also ask them, what is a census? So this is something that I'm asking that's going to reinforce the vocabulary for the class, because a census is a measure of the population, which means we're talking to everybody in the United States. And we can talk about how that's different from a sample of people and how difficult it is to do a census, to talk to literally everybody in the United States and get their information, which is why it's only done every 10 years. So this graph gets them sort of talking about current events, and also reinforces the vocabulary.
So you're doing like a different graph each week?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
and do you find that the students are more apt to respond to each other because they have, like, do they respond to each other, or are they
Mhm.
responding directly to the
So they
prompt?
post, what they notice about the graph. Sometimes I'll have different questions that I'll ask them, but they
Mhm.
also respond to their classmates. Maybe somebody that noticed something a little bit different or related to it in a different way. Like maybe they have relatives in California and they're talking about, what happened in California or what's going on in Florida.
That's great. It's like super relevant, right? If it's,
Mhm.
a weekly, like what's going on every week in
Mhm.
the New York Times, and,
Yeah.
helping them to like pay attention to the current events and tie it to math. That's really fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really great. They actually release a new graph each week. So I can
Okay.
keep going, or sometimes I go through the archives and search for them based on like maybe the topic I want to talk about or something that is interesting.
So instead of waiting for like the Wordle of the day, are you waiting for the graph?
Yeah, the graph of the week. Yes, I totally get an email with the graph, the New York Times Learning Network email, and it has the graph in it. So yeah, I do. I wait for that each week.
How did you decide to try this activity? Like, where did the idea come
I
from?
think I saw it at a conference.
Okay.
Yeah, or a blog or something like that. I was exposed to it in some way, and I looked into it, and like, yeah, this is interesting. Like in statistics, we study, data and graphs, and this is just a way to kind of tie in all of that learning and build their critical thinking skills.
Yeah. Great. So, are there any assignments or activities that you try that you were nervous about trying? What were some of those things, or what was one of them? How did it turn out? And then, we talk a lot on the podcast about, faculty trying things and sometimes they work well, sometimes they don't. But what do you learn by things that maybe don't work out that well, and how do you adjust it for students and things like that? So, what is an assignment that you did try, and maybe it worked great, and why do you think it worked so well? But even more interesting, an assignment that maybe didn't work as well. Sort of what you learned through that experience.
Yeah, that's a good question. In my Stats 2 classes, I've started to incorporate data analysis projects where the students will go through kind of like from start to finish the statistical process. So they'll gather their data either through like a survey or sampling. They'll organize the data. They'll summarize the data by like doing calculations on the mean and the sample standard deviation, make a histogram of the data. So to kind of visualize everything. And then from there, they'll go through a hypothesis test. So they'll have a hypothesis about their data, run that whole hypothesis test, and then draw a conclusion from that. So my goal there was, in Stats 2, a lot of times students are just presented with the already summarized data. And then they start from like the middle or toward the end of the process and they just do the hypothesis test. So this was kind of getting them involved like from the very start to finish of how that experience would go. So I was nervous about it because it relied a whole lot on students remembering things from Stats 1 that they might not have remembered. And that was my first mistake. Not doing a sufficient enough review of like how to do these calculations, how to make the graphs. I had a little bit of that, but it was not enough. So that was a big lesson there. And then the other thing that was tricky for the students was actually going through the process of collecting the data. So in one of the projects, the students surveyed their friends and family about their TV watching habits. And I created directions which I thought were pretty clear, but ended up not being clear enough. So I got data that was or questions and data that were all over the place and ended up being hard for the students to analyze. So when I went back and did this again, and I guess I should mention this was for an asynchronous class, so I'm not having like any direct contact with the students. Like I probably would have learned these lessons a lot faster in an in-person class, but it didn't happen that way. So I just had to go back and make videos, and I would have conferences with students. If they had trouble, I would do like a start to finish example of how to sample the data and what might be a good way to run your survey and things like that. And then sort of the same thing happened with the other projects that I did where the students were sampling. Like we were looking at Major League Baseball pitchers and their ERAs for 2 different years, and I actually, got the data for them and they just had to sample. So we were just practicing sampling. They could do like a simple random sample, which is kind of like a lottery, or a systematic sample where they have a random starting point and they could pick like every 7th pitcher or something like that. So I was able to make some videos walking them through the process, how to do it in Excel. And the results this time around have been better. We'll see. But just with asynchronous classes and projects like this, it's always about tweaking what you're doing and going back and saying, okay, are these directions clear enough? Should I do this in a video? Would it be better if they hear me talking versus writing the directions out, or should I have both and things like that? So it's been a learning experience, but I'm sticking I'm sticking with the projects because I think it's a valuable experience for the students.
How do you reflect on those changes that you want to make? Do you talk through it in your mind? Do you talk to other colleagues?
Mostly I have those reflections when I'm grading their projects. I'm like, oh, this didn't go well. A lot of people missed this part, or this was weird, and I got weird responses from some people on this. So just going back and reflecting on that. I would like to collaborate more with my colleagues on this, but at this point I haven't.
Yeah, the reflective component is so important, right? Because I know I've been in that position before. I probably all have, where we get the final work and you go, but that's not even close to what I thought. And then going back and trying to figure out exactly where the misstep was. And more often than not, it's, at least for me, it's me needing to be more clear in certain areas, or even whatever is in my head. Clearly, I didn't articulate it in a way that they understood what needed to be done. And it's such an important practice to have. So my question is that a practice that you sort of grew into the more that you taught? Or was that something early on you realized this reflective component really needs to be a part of my teaching?
I think I came by it naturally. I guess I'm the type of person that always wants to make things better, and I'm always maybe too critical of the things that I do. So yeah, I think I've come by it naturally, just reflecting on things and wanting to make it better. How can I make it better? What can I do next time?
Do you ever survey your students, or do you survey your students at the end of the semester to get even additional feedback on some of the assignments? And how does that go?
Yeah, I usually ask them, what did they enjoy in the course? What was interesting for them? What didn't go so well? Different things like that to get feedback from them. And even if I try out a new project or activity, I usually ask the students how they thought it went. And they're honest.
That is true, given the opportunity.
Do you collect it in a survey format, or in face to face? You just verbally collect it, or depends?
Mostly in a survey format.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll just, if it's an in-person class, I'll just ask them informally.
Yeah, and they'll always tell you how they feel. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, when you're evaluating, so you're getting all the information back, what is that process like for you? Because I know you have to get some responses where you're this might not be as accurate as I think it is. So basically, how do you weed out sort of what is positive that will improve your teaching as opposed to maybe somebody was just having a bad moment when they completed the survey, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I kind of look at it as sort of big picture type thing. What is the overall opinion? If it's an in-person class, I know the students really well, and I know sort of what's gone on throughout the semester. So I definitely take that into consideration. With online class, it's a little bit trickier in an asynchronous environment. But I kind of look at the big picture, and then if they're if students mention a specific assignment, I'll definitely go back and say, okay, what is, what do you think the student is trying to say here, and can I do something better in that situation?
So Erin, The other, like 2 weeks ago in class, I had 3 students that talked about how they have so much anxiety around completing their math requirements, and that they just can't even deal with it. They can't cope. They don't want to take a math class right now, and and so what would you say to like non-mathematics faculty, like when we hear that from our students, and maybe we ourselves have a little bit of anxiety around stats because we didn't do so well when we were in college with it. So what advice would you give to us to be able to relay to our students? And then what do you do for your students, right, as they come into class, maybe knowing they have some of that anxiety ahead of time?
And that's a really good question. I think we have to be really careful not to pass that anxiety on to our students or feed the anxiety. It's okay if you struggled in math. That is normal. Even I've struggled in math, throughout my career. And I think, just basically telling the students, like at Tri-C, we have some amazing faculty in math. I'm sure you know some of them. And, just reach out to that teacher, talk to them about your experience, and get to know them, and they're going to help you. I mean, like I said, we have amazing faculty here, and they'll do what they can to help you be successful. And in addition to that, I mean, we at Tri-C don't make students take like a million math classes that they don't need. We are targeting them exactly for what they need for their major. So they just need to get in there and do it and ask for help and get to know your professor.
I think that's so important. I love what you said in terms of not passing the anxiety or feeding the anxiety, because I'll admit I have some anxiety with math. And I talk to my students about it, and they always say, well, you teach English. What math is there? And I just sort of tell them, I do more math than I ever thought that I would be doing in this position. If it's just grades or even coordinating Studio 101, there's just a lot of work there. And I said, it's important to go through the class, understand the principles, get the help as you need it. I'm going to shift the conversation slightly to something that we talked about before we started the podcast, and that's flipped classrooms. And you mentioned that you do that for your classes. At what point did you determine that would be most effective? And how do you help students sort of understand the concept of a flip? Because I think a lot of times many of them don't. They don't understand sort of what needs to be done ahead of time. So sort of talk through a little bit about that.
And
if you don't mind.
maybe also explain what a flipped classroom is too.
Oh yeah, so you can start with that.
Yeah. So
Pop quiz.
Yes.
What's a flipped classroom?
Yes. So for a flipped classroom, I have the students do what would be traditionally the lecture outside of class. So for my classes specifically, I have guided notes that I give to the students, and I post videos that I've created myself on Blackboard that walk them through the guided notes. And then for my students in particular, I've done a couple of different things to incentivize them to do the notes. One is that I assign points to the notes. So they're required to complete those before our class meeting. And then I've also done quizzes, like concept check quizzes, to make sure that the students kind of get the main ideas of the assignment. I started doing a flipped classroom, I don't know, it's been a million years. Before I came to Tri-C, I was doing a flipped classroom. And I think the reason that I wanted to do it is because I think it was because the students were struggling with persistence in their homework assignments and projects and things like that they were doing outside of class. They would go through the whole, class period where we're learning the concepts, everything would seem to be fine. They get to the homework and you reach a challenging question, then they just give up. So the flip class was a way for me to have them experience that struggle inside the classroom, where they can either work with a partner, a group, or ask me for help. So that was the reason that I did it, and I will never, ever go back.
So all your classrooms you do flipped
Yes.
classroom?
Yep.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
If I'm teaching a new class, I won't do the flipped model right away because I need to get used to I need to fine tune like the guided notes and things like that and get used to sort of the intricacies of, what students struggle with and fine tune things. But yeah, eventually I flip everything.
So talk a little bit about your guided notes. Like, how do you set that up for the students?
So it's just a Word document that I create that basically has like definitions. So if there's like a wall of text from the textbook, and I use OERs for almost all of my classes. So I just take the information from the textbook and I'll put like little blanks that they have to fill in. So like if we're talking about like a sample mean, they might have to write, part of the definition. And then I usually leave the formulas blank that they have to write in. So they kind of have to be engaged while they're going through it and fill in those blanks. And then from there, like all of the examples that we do, I'll have the questions written out, but they have to complete all the work as they go through the guided notes.
Did it take you a lot of time to develop a flipped class? Like, is this something that you did slowly over the years or over the semesters, or were you able to?
Usually what I like to do is create the guided notes first, and then if I have an in-person class, we'll do the traditional lecture and they'll go through the guided notes. So that semester I will dedicate to creating the guided notes, and then the following semester I'll make the videos for the guided notes, and then we're good to go.
I like chunking it for yourself, right?
Uh-huh,
And also
yeah.
for the students.
Yeah,
I like that
yeah.
approach.
It makes it more manageable. I mean, I've had to do it all in a semester, when I've taught an asynchronous course like I did Calc 2 last spring, and it was a lot of work to do both at the same time.
Are you learning about any new teaching strategies that you would like to try and implement in your classes in the coming semester?
I'm actually thinking about adopting a new statistics curriculum. The OER I have right now is nice and it's free, which I like. And I think I'll stick with it for like practice problems and homework problems. But there's another resource out there that is used heavily by like AP stats teachers called Skew the Script. And it is basically, it covers the same learning outcomes that we have, but it does it in a more relevant way using more modern and current data and brings in current events a little bit more than the resource I have now. And I'm actually having my students kind of review some of the videos right now to see if they think the approach would be interesting, and I'm gonna try a few out this semester to see what they think.
That's great.
I think that's a great idea, having the students sort of review it first, right? That way you get a good sense. Because I think too often we just sort of jump right. Like everyone. Sometimes I just sort of jump.
That's strange.
Yeah. Sometimes I just sort of jump into it going, I think this would be effective without recognizing, maybe until it's too late, like doing a survey at the end that really wasn't that as effective as I thought it was. So I think that's a good strategy to use, definitely.
Yeah, and I think the resource uses a lot of current events and can get into politics in some fashion in a nonpartisan way. But I just wanted to gauge kind of their reaction to that, because a lot of times in math you feel like you can step away from those sorts of things. But I think in statistics, you can definitely bring current events into play.
I love this method of using the current events to and like applying it, right? Like I think about when I was in math classes and why I struggled, right? Is that I there was nothing relevant for me to connect the dots to. So I love this use of current events. But earlier you had mentioned that you were interested in like collaborating with other faculty, on various projects or whatnot. So what interests you that you would like to collaborate with others on?
Definitely the LTE grant and developing projects for students based on baseball statistics. That's gonna come into the mix in the spring, so I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, honestly, just anything. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Congratulations again on being a Bessie Award winner.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate you taking the time. So wish you the best in the rest of the semester and the upcoming academic year.
Thank you so much. It was fun to be here.
And we'll want to know how the game goes in the spring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you want to join me, you can.
All right.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Thank you.